Netherlands. Hello, everyone. Ambassador Terry Earthwind Nichols here, along with my friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Kiel, and we're going to talk about a tribute to World Refugee Day 2024. Peter, this is going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely. Very, very excited and honored to be here with you, Ambassador.
Well, I'm excited to have you here because we represent two different kinds of refugees per se. Myself as a Native American, my ancestors got displaced within their world and became refugees of a different kind that doesn't get spoken about too much, but we're going to speak a little bit about it today. And you, sir, you are a refugee originally. Why don't you tell us your story up front because it's a great one, and we'll just move from there.
Of course, Ambassador Nichols, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm the child of refugees. My background is I'm Cambodian American. I was born and raised here in the United States, but I was raised and born to Cambodian refugee parents, both my mom and my dad. Like millions of people in the 1970s, had to encounter and endure, the tragedy of the 1975 to 1979 Khmer Rouge genocide, or the Cambodian genocide, which of course wiped out an estimated 2 million people, innocent lives. And we're talking about, everyone from, journalists, civil servants, moms, dads, uncles, aunts, grandparents, children, and everything in between. And we always say estimated because the real number has not been confirmed because of how cruel that incident was for many people, including my parents. And so they are refugees, and of course, refugees, as we'll get into in a little bit, uh, refugees are different from immigrants, right? Because the technical definition of a refugee is a person or persons who have been forcibly removed from their home country as a result of war, violence, conflict, and then they have had to resettle into another country. Typically, if you look at the research, typically it's in a neighboring country. It's in a neighboring country. Whereas an immigrant is someone who sort of voluntarily, typically because of economic reasons, voluntarily um, chooses to enter another country in order to, sort of gain economic well-being and prosperity. So, yeah, so my parents were refugees. They came to the United States by way of Paris. And as I've noted earlier, my mom and my dad both have lost every member of their family to this cruelty. And so they really had each other. They met in Paris. My dad was actually on his way back from the United States. He was a student in Cambodia in the naval. He was a naval officer as a student, and they had an exchange program. So he was actually in the United States during the 1970s when everything was sort of falling apart in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. But he, along with his cohort of other soldiers, were actually on their way back from the United States to Cambodia because they were all being told that they had to go back to fight. But they were actually being lied to. In reality, what was really happening was they were going back to Cambodia to be executed. And it's a long story, but the long story short is my parents met in Paris because, my dad, who was on his way back to Cambodia, they didn't know what was happening. My mom had just left Cambodia and warned these soldiers not to go back to Cambodia, that they would actually be executed. No one really listened other than two or three, a handful of folks, including my dad. And the reason why that happened was because my parents fell in love. My mom stole his passport, and then the next morning he couldn't leave. And so they made their way to the United States and via Philadelphia, and here I am. But we'll get into the conversations about what happens to refugees, I'm sure, as they enter a new country and the types of services that are available to them. So that's my background.
Great story. Great story. How about that, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, you're hearing it real time. Okay, from mom and dad's voice. And there's been a lot of there's a lot of people here from the Americas that are or will be listening to this, and thank you for doing so. The Native American forced movements and displacements was very tragic. The most noted trail of tears, the mass exodus of the East Coast Indian population out to the West, and the cruelty that ensued in that transit. People who were sick or whatever, they just left them on the side of the trail and kept going. Somebody died, they just kept going. They did not give any time for honoring anyone or anything. So that tragedy is in just about every Native American's bloodline in some form or another. And it happens in a lot of different places here, right in this world right now, in different countries. Syria is a big one right now, the Ethiopian conflicts, Ukraine, people who are multiple generations in southeast Ukraine don't have a country anymore. It's just gone. Like the Cambodia, it's just gone. Now it's come back, but it went through some really tough times of occupation. Is a lot of it, and that's another storyline for another day. The occupation situation, but immigrants are technically not refugees, as Peter spoke. They've got someplace and they want to come to another country to have a better life than the life they had in their own country, and a lot of them claimed political asylum and those types of things, and it's so hard to prove whether or not those allegations were true. Because number one, a lot of the countries, Central America, South America, all over Indonesia, it's impossible to do criminal checks or anything like that because there isn't any records. They just throw people in jail and they're in prison for whenever, and they never hear a judge or for that matter, legal advice. That's all part of this day. One day is better than no days. Okay, I would like one day a month, as Peter would probably reflect as well, because this is a major problem in the world's population today. It's bad enough that we have serious climate issues and environmental issues that everyone is dealing with, but we have some really serious, gruesome people out there doing very bad things to people. Peter.
Yes, sir. So no, I concur with that, and I think one of the things that we as Americans, and of course the global community, industrialized nations, which, by the way, here's an interesting fact from the International Rescue Committee, which, as many of us know, because I'm quite certain your audience is very well educated and well read, but the International Rescue Committee was founded in 1933 because Albert Einstein recommended to the world that we had to do a much better job to support refugees because of things that were happening as a result of World War One. Well, fast forward to 2024. I think one of the things that we have to get better at doing as global citizens, not just American citizens, because the world is quite small, but global citizens, is to recognize that yes, I'm not naive. I do know that war and conflict is probably inevitable in our civilization. I would like to think that it doesn't have to be inevitable. I would like to think that we can lead more with compassion and kindness. I would like to think that we can lead through nonviolence and peace. like our forefathers, like of course Dr. Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and a whole line of folks. But the reality is this: the reality is that we live in a civilization that has, for a very long time, have known war, violence, and conflict. Well, the resultant effect with an E, the resultant effect of war, violence, and conflict is you're going to have um, people like my parents, like your family, like your ancestors, Ambassador, who are going to be what I call collateral damage. And when we think about war policies, we also have to simultaneously, concurrently, and very strategically think about the aftermath of war. Specifically, what are we going to do as a result of, you know, bombing, certain countries? And once those people flee those countries, what are we going to do to help them? It is one thing to talk about war policy, and as I've noted, I'm not naive. I recognize war and conflict is probably inevitable in our modern civilization. I'm not naive about that. I'm not saying we shouldn't go to war, shouldn't go to conflict. What I'm saying is that if you do go to war, if you do decide to have conflict, we must also think carefully about the aftermath of said war and said conflict. What are you going to do? What types of policies will you implement to ensure that people like my parents are entered into a new country like America, where they have absolutely no idea what this place is? We are grateful to be here. Let me be clear about that. We're very grateful. It has nothing to do about being ungrateful. We are grateful. What I'm saying is that I've watched my parents suffer even after having received their American citizenship. I have seen how they've struggled and they worked very hard. So 2024, almost 40 to 50 years later, after they've entered the United States, I'm still trying to figure out what policies have we put in place to properly adjust and help refugees and their families and their children and then generations later. I still don't know what that answer is. In fact, it's still very unclear to me. So I think that's a conversation that we need to continue to have. And I would urge, the United Nations and other large international bodies to really think, through some of these key policies. What are they? And most importantly, how can these policies be applied to help refugees and their children to better live, sort of a happy and peaceful life in their new country. So that's what I have to say about that, Ambassador.
Absolutely. I've been a global ambassador on behalf of the United Refugee Green Council of Cyprus for a number of years now, and proud to do and continue that work. And you've recently joined up with us, and thank you for doing so. The United Nations, Refugee, UNHCR, they're doing what they can. A lot of what happens through and around the UN is very disorganized. That is the biggest problem that the UN has, is too many bosses and not enough Indians. So people are telling people, go here, no go there, go here, go no there, skimming off the top, taking funds and using them for personal and other services. And people are starving, and that's not all right. That is not all right. We're all born with love in our heart. We don't come out of the womb ready to fight. We don't even know black from white or whatever.
Yeah.
We learn that. We learn with filters. Unfortunately, a large part of the population keep those filters. And that's to the good of those people who want to keep you in check under the thumb to have more power and more riches available for doing so. Okay. And those are the things that we talk about all the time. All right. But, let's take a minute here. Not only are people displaced, ladies and gentlemen, they're starving. They don't have proper medical care. Some of these refugee camps in North Africa, I understand, don't even have regular medical supplies coming in. Look at the folks in Gaza. I don't have any problem with some retaliation or getting rid of a rebel group that attacks a country. What I have a problem with is the widespread elimination of anybody associated with them. That's not okay. And that's not the Israeli people, and everybody knows it. Okay. The people are people, and they're good people. And there's a few in key positions that's given a bad reputation to the whole. And that's too bad. But it's things like this that we do have to pay attention to. It is part of our responsibility as human beings to take care of each other.
Mhm.
We all love and want to be loved. Okay. We just kind of not sure which side of that equation is what. Sometimes it gets a little cloudy. Peter.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I would also like to add something else, and of course, Ambassador, you touched upon very correctly and very astutely the immediate ramifications of, of resettlement of, refugees fleeing for their lives. Again, once again, as a result of war, conflict, primarily. And of course, there are refugees as a result of environmental distress and disasters. But here I'm talking specifically about, refugees who are fleeing as a result of war and violence. There's another point I'd like to add to this, which I don't think gets enough attention, which is the intergenerational effect of of being a refugee. Oh, our company, I have a research firm. It's called Rapid Research Evaluation. We just wrapped up a year-long, a very rigorous mixed methods year-long study to evaluate the state of Cambodians in America and how their children and their grandchildren were doing 40 plus years after the war. This study was commissioned by a family office that reached out to us, a family foundation. What we found was, not to our surprise, what we found, one of the major findings was that there was an intergenerational trauma effect onto the mental health of children and grandchildren of people who were refugees or are refugees, meaning that it didn't matter, and this was new scientific finding, right? It didn't matter what or how you entered the United States, meaning that we often assume that refugees are the ones with the mental health issues and dealing with trauma. But what our study found was that was not just, that was half the story. The other half of the story was the children who were born in the United States and their children who were a generation removed were still dealing with some pretty serious mental health and issues such as depression, anxiety. Some of our focus group participants noted that these kids, they were high school graduates, they went to college. People often assume that just because you go to college and grad school that you're doing okay. Well, what they shared with us was that they actually weren't doing okay, that they had panic attacks. A number of them had panic attacks in college, couldn't get out of their dorm beds, they couldn't leave, they figure out what was happening. And so the point I'm making here is that we need to further study and examine through rigorous methodologies the intergenerational aspect of being a refugee. And this isn't just about Cambodians. We're talking about the Rwandans in the mid 90s. They have their kids now and their grandkids. We're talking about, the Ukrainians now, the Syrians who've been battling conflict for decades, and just so on, just around the globe. Once they enter industrial nations like the United States, how are they doing? And then we're not just saying, again, not just the refugees, but how are their kids doing? How are their grandkids doing? We need more resources to really further examine this impact. So that's what I would add to that, Ambassador.
Excellent, excellent. Intergenerational. What the parents and grandparents lived in the country that or host country was from their country. They lived the way they used to live. Okay, and it was very difficult for them to acclimate into their host country. Some of them never did. Okay, they lived out the rest of their lives in a system that supported them and or family and generational families that took care of them until their death. Okay, now in every society there are those personalities that don't connect to that. They just don't. They go out, they get educated, like you, Peter. They go out, they get educated, they enter mainstream society, and they move forward. Yeah, they don't take on the drama trauma that their parents and grandparents had to take on in order to survive. And now you and I and those like us, we thrive out here because we no longer recognize that kind of behavior. And we don't hang out with people who do that kind of behavior. Okay.
Hmm.
You are who you associate with. So, for the most part in America, sorry to say this, I'm a native born American too. If you're not a male white Protestant, you're the minority. Doesn't matter if you're a female white Protestant, you're still not in a majority. There's different places in every country that has its little strongholds of groups that were initially forced into that situation and was never able to get out of it. Go back in history during the Great Potato Famine of Ireland and all of the immigrants that came over from Ireland. They had to figure out New York and Boston and all those kinds of things just the way as the first pilgrims hit. They had to figure it out. And then when they became well established and well educated, they started to slowly be accepted into the mainstream society. But even then, there's still enclaves of people that don't recognize them as part of the U.S. And they come from ethnic groups that are not of the U.S. They're immigrants too. If you check your bloodlines. So these are all things that we honor today. How about some final thoughts, Peter? Do you have some final thoughts here before we end up?
Absolutely. And thank you once again for the opportunity to have this space and to hold space with you on this very important day. It's an honor and a privilege. The last thing I will say is, really a call to action. Because we could have these conversations ad nauseum, ad infinitum, but the reality is that we have to take a call to action because that's how this planet will shift in a very positive direction. For me, something that I've engaged in for over a decade is really this notion of compassionate leadership. And I know when you say the word compassion, some people kind of cringe and they think, oh, it's soft and it's dovey and it's lovey and it's not realistic. But the reality is that I was a senior research fellow for the Stanford Medical School for a year, a few years ago. And I spent that time really investigating the scientific um, evidence around compassionate practices and compassionate leadership. So we evaluated an 8 to 12 week program. What we found was, and this was through C-Care. I don't know if you're familiar with C-Care, but it was founded by Dr. James Dottie, who was a neurosurgeon, New York Times bestselling neurosurgeon, and also the Dalai Lama. But what we found was that when they did a brain scan of individuals who were undergoing compassionate training, that there were activities happening in their brain that was transforming really their body. There's transforming, like it's sending positive endorphins and signals throughout their body, so you could see the scientific impact of compassionate training. And then I will take it a step further. Yes, it's important to get that training, but you have to put it into practice. You have to put it into action. And, the one thing I would urge your audience, Ambassador, to really think about is, what is that one tiny micro compassionate action that they can take in their lives today, whether it be in their immediate lives as an individual, and or with their family, and or within their professional careers. What is that one micro compassionate action that they can take that will, at the very least, create some level of self-fulfillment, create some level of self-satisfaction, knowing that they will know that, okay, I am making a difference. Yeah, it's small, but I'm making a difference. And here's why that's important. This is the old Japanese philosophy, Kaizen, which is you got to take small incremental steps, and the aggregate of the steps is really the true impact. And that's how I live my life. And so I would say the call to action for your audience and others listening is identify what your micro compassionate action is, and let it aggregate, however small, let it aggregate over the course of your life, and then bear witness to how that or those sets of actions, bear witness to how that will impact not just yourself, but the people around you. And then maybe even, dare I say, maybe even society. Maybe even society. And I think that in the collective is how we change this planet, and how this planet has always been changed. It takes people like us who care enough to say something, and then it takes people like us who care enough to do something. So I will leave your audience with that, Ambassador. And once again, thank you for the time.
Excellent. Well done, son. Well done. And, let's start with something simple. Look at somebody and smile and acknowledge they're real. They're a person. My wife and I have a really great reputation in our area, in our community, because we're nice to everybody. Oh, that's Ambassador Terry and his wife. They're really nice people. Okay, that's good stuff. When lockdown came, we had people from our local store contact us and say, if you need anything, we'll deliver it. Okay, that is having real compassion. If you can be anything, be kind. Okay, and being kind doesn't mean you're a softie and a pushover. Far from it. It just means that you have the ability, and you do exercise the ability of being kind to other people. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this great conversation, a tribute to World Refugee Day 2024. And leave us some comments if you like. We'll be watching here for the next day or two. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.